the handling of Sri Lanka's international relations at that point with particular finesse. And I refer especially to the relationship with India, which Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has recently commented on. And also the ability of the President to so handle domestic issues as to ensure that the continuing support of the people of Sri Lanka was available for this effort. So it was the coming together of all these elements that accounted for what many people believe to be not merely difficult, but virtually impossible. Now, it is important to remember that during the whole of that period, the armed forces were expected to play a very unorthodox and unconventional role. In military history, the victor is expected to demonstrate certain qualities and capabilities. In our situation, what was expected of the armed forces was fundamentally different. It was an initiative that was directed towards the liberation of an oppressed people. In many comments that are made about the circumstances which prevailed during the period of the conflict, it is all too easily forgotten that this was one of the largest and most serious hostage situations ever recorded in contemporary military history. We were dealing with more than 300,000 people who were held hostage by a terrorist organization. People who were striving to come to the government-controlled areas, where all facilities, food, health, rehabilitation was available to them. And at gunpoint, several people lost their lives in the process. The terrorist group was endeavoring to retain them as human shields, forcibly making them dig trenches and perform services of various kinds, not spontaneously, not voluntarily, but very much against their will. No government worth its salt can possibly acquiesce in such a situation. It is the indispensable duty of the government to intervene effectively in that situation and make it possible for the people who are being held hostage to enjoy freedom. There are allegations in the Darusman report, for example, that there was a deliberate attempt on the part of the government of Sri Lanka with the connivance of the armed forces to starve the civilian population. That is an extremely grave allegation. It involves liability under several international instruments, including the Geneva Convention. But let us, for a moment, dispassionately and objectively examine the facts. Government was sending food to the affected areas. This is probably the only instance in history when a government was feeding the terrorists. We were sending food, medical supplies, and other necessities of life to the affected areas, on the basis that it is the duty of the government of Sri Lanka to look after all its people. We were paying public officials in those areas who, through no fault of their own, found themselves compelled to carry out the instructions of the terrorist group. When food was being sent to the north, the terrorist group took action to close down the A9 highway. The government did not then say that that is action that the LTTE had taken. Therefore, there was nothing that the government could do about it. We did not adopt that attitude. We found alternative ways of getting food across to the people of the north. Ships were used to convey food and medical supplies by sea. The ships were then attacked, and several ships were indeed sunk. The government then made arrangements within the north and the east to collect food, often at the expense of other communities living in those areas, to make the basic essentials of life available to the people of the north, notwithstanding the persevering attempts that had been made by the LTT to deprive the people of the north of the food which they required for their sustenance. The government did not give up. When one method proved impossible, the government strained every sinew to conceive of other modalities for bringing food within the reach of the people of the north. Now, it is not in anger but with deep sadness that I remind you that in the Darusman report, there is a paragraph in which they say that there were individual members of the armed forces who came to the rescue of civilians, some of them very old, disabled, wounded, who were struggling to cross the waters of lakes and lagoons in order to reach safety. Now, this credit is given not to the armed forces collectively or as an institution, but to individual members of the armed forces. There are many features of the report which indicate beyond any doubt whatsoever that it is a biased document, and it is a document that was prepared for a political purpose. Now, this is one clear illustration. Even for that, and the visual evidence is very clear, there are photographs of members of the army risking their own lives to help innocent civilians to reach safety. But the impression is created in the report that these are acts of good Samaritans rendering some form of service in the midst of demons who personified wickedness. That is the clear implication of the relevant paragraph. I won't dwell on it, but I will just take a couple of moments to indicate to you the depth of the conspiracy. The Secretary General appoints a panel, entirely unofficial, and repeatedly assures the government of Sri Lanka and indeed the world that this panel is appointed purely for an advisory purpose. It's a fiduciary relationship between the Secretary General and his advisors. Of course, the Secretary General is entitled to seek advice from any quarter that he desires. Well, he calls for advice, and he repeatedly stated that that is all there is to the appointment of the panel. The panel then submits a report to the Secretary General. The panel says in the report that they have prepared the report in a manner that is appropriate for publication. The Secretary General did not ask the panel to prepare the report in that form. And if the purpose of the panel was simply to offer advice to the appointing authority, it is rather difficult to understand why the panel should take it upon themselves to prepare the report in a manner that is appropriate for publication. They say so categorically and explicitly.